If memory serves correct, JT, you did chapter 12, Cody, you did 13, and JT back at 14. We're just going to back up and just have a couple of key bullet points and see how well y'all paid attention to these young men as they taught the class. If you had a bullet point for chapter 12, what would chapter 12 be? Genesis chapter 12. Say, give it, talk louder. I can't hear well. Call of Abraham. There you go. Abraham is called. If I was going to summarize that whole chapter with that, that's what I would call it. Abraham is called. He's also given. He is given something in his call. What is he given? A promise. And what is that promise?
He's going to inherit the land of Canaan.
Part of that. That's part of it. But also he was told something else besides the land part of it. What was it?
Great seed.
That's right. Through him, all nations would be blessed, right? And we know, looking in hindsight, what was that promise in relation to? What was he talking about? How was everybody going to be blessed through Abraham? Through Christ. He was going to bring about Christ. Cody, you are right. It is way hot up here. It is way, way hot. That is chapter 12. Chapter 13. What happened in chapter 13? If you're going to, again, bullet point the whole chapter.
Abraham and Lot separated.
That's right. They can't get along. They've grown too big. Their herdsmen are fighting, and they separate. Which way? Okay, not way. What did Lot choose when given the choice? Did he take the easy way or the hard way? From the physical eye, to use that term, he chose the easy way, the fertile ground. He looked this way. This is green. This is well watered. I have a lot of animals. I'm going to go this way. Did that work out well for him in the long run? No, it did not. Because what happened in chapter 14? Yeah. He's living in a land that's well watered. That land rebels against the people who are over them. There is a fight, and Lot and his family get taken off and hauled away. Captivity, right? What does Abraham do about this? And then Cody's going to summarize this well this morning for us, right? What did Abraham do? He rounded up an army that from his own people and from probably drew from the people where he was staying that he had an alliance with, and went and brought them back. So Lot's choice in choosing something that was easy put Abraham, not only put him out, but put him in danger. He had to endanger his own people to go and save Lot. Who did Abraham meet coming back from bringing Lot back and conquering that nation who had taken Lot and his family? Melchizedek. What do we know about him? The easy answer is not much. Yeah, we don't know a whole lot, right? We know a little bit in the Old Testament, and then in the Hebrew writer, we actually hear more about him in the New Testament. Chapter, I think, 5, 6, and 7, mainly 7, talk about him, comparing him to Christ. What does chapter 14 tell us about Melchizedek? What are the few things it tells us?
He's a
Priest of the Most High God, right? That's it. And what did Abraham do to King Melchizedek? That's right. All the spoils that he had, he's going to give it all back. But he does tithe first to King Melchizedek. And then the New Testament writer in Hebrews actually tells us that Melchizedek was actually, I think the term actually was a better person, that he was giving a contribution back to a superior person. I didn't know I wasn't going to teach last week, so I did my prep work, and I was all studying and trying to just figure out some stuff about him because we don't have a lot of information. So, okay, segue here. What I'm telling you now is non-biblical. Don't get scared about that. I'm not trying to persuade you to anything. But it is Jewish history, and it's something I had never come across before. It's unusual that the New Testament writer tells us that Melchizedek was a better person than Abraham, because how do we know Abraham? How is he referred in the Bible? Friend of God. So now, Abraham referred to as a friend of God, and Melchizedek is pointed out as being better than him. That piques the curiosity, right? That's strange. And then JT in his class brought out something that I hadn't thought about either that also piqued my curiosity. When the invading army from the north came down and was conquering the nations where Lot lived and rebelled, It talks about all the kings and all the lands they went through and fought and destroyed and took over and brought back into servitude. Where was King Melchizedek in that process? Did he live in the same area as those conquered kings? Yeah, he was right there in the middle, JT, right there in the middle of it. How come they didn't touch him? We don't know because it's not said. Now here's the interesting part. We're not told who King Melchizedek is. And probably that term is actually a change of what his name actually was. It's a descriptive term that's going to be used to take the emphasis off the person and put it on the idea of the person, without mother, without father, without beginning, without end, so they could compare him to Christ, how Christ was going to fulfill that role in the New Testament for us. But again, the curiosity part is, and this goes to the inspiration of the Bible, something else that JT pointed out, like when it got to the battle of Abraham taking his people back, it's like a verse or two, and Abraham conquered them and took them back. Whereas if a man was writing that just for historical purposes, that would be the majority of the description of that battle, right? So again, the question, who is Melchizedek as a person?
Well, it says he was the priest of the God Most High.
That's
so
right.
I think everybody respected him.
That's exactly, everybody respected him, and it seems like everybody knew him. Because Abraham knew him and recognized him as a high priest and gave him a tithe, and Melchizedek took it. It wasn't like he wasn't like he was arguing against it. Jewish history says that King Melchizedek was Shem, one of Noah's sons. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But what I did find, and I printed out something you just don't think about because of how long these people lived, and this is not going to play well up here, but it's a genealogy printout of all their ages, of all the from Adam all the way through Abraham. Right here, Shem is the yellow bar. These are all his grandkids. And if you look for where he was born and when he was died, hopefully you can at least see the scale. He outlived his great, 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 great grandchild. Matter of fact, Shem outlived Abraham. That's something that I just didn't ever really consider or think about. That is a true Bible fact. That is true. So the fact that Shem was concurrent with Abraham, actually outlived Abraham, possibility's there. And then just a possibility is, who would they have recognized? Who would everybody recognize as a high priest? Perhaps somebody who came, direct descendant through the flood, who would bring back the traditions. I know we're still in the patriarchal period, people teaching God, talking directly to Abraham and different heads of the family. But again, the possibility is there. To me, does it matter? No. Are we told about it? Does it make a bit of difference spiritually? No. Is it interesting? Yeah. It's really interesting. So again, it's the fact that I found I thought was unique that, take it for what it's worth. Any questions on that? Any questions about anything? Well, 13 and 14? Yes, ma'am?
You keep saying Abraham, and my book keeps saying Abram.
Yep, that's me. It's the same person that he's called Abraham. His name has changed later. He is Abram here. You can also find this, I'll take some consolation in the fact that when Moses is writing this, he is writing it after historical events, after they've happened. And a lot of times he inserts names of people and places that weren't called that at that time, but for the people who were reading it when he was writing it, would have understood geographic areas where he was talking about and people who lived there, even though they didn't live there at that time. So yes, this is Abram. He hasn't been called, his name hasn't been changed to Abraham yet. What else? I see Katie back there talking like I'm doing something wrong, so.
You're good.
All good right now, at least through this point. So we're good? Chapter 15. Y'all ready? Somebody want to read the first 6 verses for me?
After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your exceedingly great reward. But Abram said, Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I go childless? And the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. Then Abram said, Look, you have given me no offspring. Indeed, one born in my house is my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, this one shall not be your heir, but one who will come from your own body shall be your heir. Then he brought him outside and said, look down toward heaven, and count the stars, if you are able to number them. And he said to him, so shall your descendants be. And he believed in the Lord, and he accounted it to him for righteousness.
All right. So what is Abraham's primary concern in these first 6 verses right here?
His offspring.
Don't have a child, right? Because what was the promise made to him back in chapter 12? Through his seed, all nations were going to be blessed. And he's here. And do we know how old he is right here? Ballpark? 90, 80? Turn back to chapter 12, verse 4. How old was he? Ballpark.
Well, his first child, he was only 86, so about 75.
He was 75 when he was called. So this is later. So he's at least 75. Maybe closer to 80. He's somewhere in that area. So he's concerned about God's promise. Supposed to have a child. I'm getting pretty old here. I don't have a child yet. And he's already starting to kind of think about, well, I have people in my household that probably could be my heir who are not my own flesh and blood. And he mentions that to God. And what does God say? Ain't going to be substituted. It's going to be from your own bowels, from your own loins. It's going to be your flesh and blood. Takes him outside and said, because Abraham, I'm not faulting Abraham at all, but he wants to like, how am I going to know? He's looking for a sign or something. He's going to ask that a couple of times in this chapter. How am I going to know this is going to happen? And what does God do just right here? He takes him outside and he says what? If you can count the stars, you can count your offspring. And this is a very important verse, verse 6. What does it say about Abram?
He believed for God, God is counted righteous.
And where is that verse repeated? Really popular, New Testament. What book? Ooh, good guess. But wrong. Romans. Romans chapter 4, verse 3. That idea is repeated that Abram believed God and it was counted to him as righteousness. Now, if you take that verse stand alone, by itself, does that support the denominational view of salvation? Of all you got to do is believe to be saved? Which is in Galatians 2? I say,
Galatians 3:6.
well, see, there you go. See, I'm like, it's fine. Speak up. Galatians 3:6. I didn't find the Galatians 3:6 one, so Jennifer was not wrong. It was in Galatians as well.
Now we're okay.
It'll shut her down for the rest of class. So the denominational view says all you got to do is what to be saved? Believe. What verse do you think they might use? Romans 4:3, Galatians 3:6. Those are the verses they're going to take you to. What does the New Testament go on to explain to us about the idea, concept of faith only? It's dead. Where do we get that idea? That it's dead. James 2. If you read the book of James, short little book, 5 chapters, especially chapter 2, it's almost as if people during James's time were already getting a little false view of what's required, or perhaps the Spirit knew what man would do down the road and decided to insert a very clear instruction in the book about faith only does not save. You cannot read James chapter 2 and come away with the idea that all I got to do is have faith only. Most denominational people will just simply discard. They don't even want to talk about James. They want to talk about Romans, the writings of Paul. They don't want to talk about James because it's too plain and clear. But again, let's go back to where we're at. Is all that Abraham did was believe? Is that all that he did? No.
Depends on how you want to define believe.
Right.
Yeah. If you believe what God's telling you, you're going to follow what He tells you to do. Otherwise, it's not belief. To say I believe it and then not do it
Is not to believe.
Yeah.
Is not to believe. That's the way the Bible actually interchanged in the New Testament unbelief with disobedience. Because you can't say I believe, like Doyle is saying, and not do. You're a liar. You don't believe. So if you truly believe, you will do what he says. Turn over to Genesis chapter 26. I'm going to read real quickly the first 5 verses. Genesis 26, 1 through 5. And it says, there was a famine in the land besides the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, unto Gerar. And the Lord appeared unto him and said, go not down into Egypt, dwell in the land which I shall tell thee. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with thee, and bless thee. For unto thee and to thy seed I will give thee countries. And I will perform the oath which I swear unto Abraham thy father. And I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven. Sounds familiar, right? And I will give unto thee a seed all these countries, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. Sounds really familiar again, going back to chapter 12. Why is he going to do all this for Abraham's descendant? Verse 5. Because that Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. That's what true belief entails. Not just simply mental assent, like you're grasping a fact. When you believe, you do verse 5 of chapter 26. That's why Abraham was blessed for his belief, as Paul referred to in Galatians and Romans. Any questions on that? All good? Okay. Let's go back and read some more. Let's read 7 through 16.
And he said unto him, I am the Lord that brought thee out of Ur of the Chaldees, to give thee this land to inherit it. And he said, Lord God, whereby shall I know that I shall inherit it? And he said unto them, take me an heifer of 3 years old, and a she-goat of 3 years old, and a ram of 3 years old, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he took unto him all these, and divided them in the midst, and laid each piece one against another, but the birds divided he not. And when the fowls came down upon the carcasses, Abram drove them away. And when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and lo, and for a great darkness fell upon him. And he said unto Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years.
Go to 16, yeah.
And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterwards shall they come out with great substance. And thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace. Thou shalt be buried in a good old age. But in the 4th generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full.
Okay, so Abraham again is asking for what from God? He's still looking for a sign, right? So what does God tell him to do? What are the instructions?
Basically sacrifice three animals and 2 birds.
He's got to do exactly what God said right here about the sacrifice of some animals. It seems as if it's a, I don't know, it doesn't read as if he burned them as a traditional sacrifice. It's like he parted them asunder and they're laying on the ground, so much so that he's having to drive the vultures away to keep them away from the sacrifice. Before at evening time, the vision finally comes to him where he gets to see a revelation from God to assure him of God's promises, is what it seems like. Something I didn't think about until just now, but going along with what I just said earlier about belief requiring you to do everything that God said. What all did God tell him? 3 animals and 2 birds? What happens if he leaves off the young pigeon?
He didn't do
Yeah. What if he doesn't do one of the animals? He does like 4 out of the 5. He didn't follow the instructions. Again, as a matter of fact, you could actually honestly say, if he just did 4 of the 5, that he was in unbelief because he would be in disobedience. That's what's unfortunately going to happen to us and other people when we meet God if we leave out some key component that he has asked us to do. If we believe that God is who he says he is, we believe in his Son, if we repent of our sins and we confess, when we get to that water baptism and we balk because the majority of the quote-unquote religious world says it's not necessary, so if we go along with that, What is God going to say to us?
You work in iniquity.
I've never known you. And so I'm sure that people like the example we're given in the New Testament is going to point to all these, look at all these things that we did. We did X, Y, and Z in your name. And again, I never knew you because you didn't believe me. And I can say that because you didn't obey me. Obeying and belief are synonymous. You cannot separate. It's impossible. So he does what God asked him to do. That's Abraham's, claim to fame trademark. He does what God tells him to do. Do you think he was expecting what he saw that night? How does the verse describe it? Does it describe the vision as a pleasant thing?
Sure.
Yeah, the horror. Because what is he going to reveal to him in that vision?
That's what happened in the future is bloodline.
Yeah, what's going to happen to him? I couldn't hear you. What?
Held as slaves.
One more time.
They're being held as slaves.
They're going to be held as slaves. They're going to go to Egypt and not for good times, right? They're going to be taken there as punishment. And that's what he's being told. They're going to be afflicted, in verse 13, 400 years. Some people make a big deal about this term, 400 years. What do we know in other places of the Bible about how long they spent in captivity? The duration.
40 years.
430.
40 years.
430 was the exact time they spent down there. Is there anything wrong with 430 and 400 right here? Is that a contradiction in the Bible that disallows the Bible and says the Bible's false? Go ahead.
Well, if you look at it in the departures, as far as them being let off in captivity, there's 3 rounds of being taken away, and there's 3 rounds of release. If you go from captivity 1 to release 1, that's 400 years. Captivity 2 to release 2, that's 400 years. Captivity 3 to release 3, that's 400 years. But it would all span the 430 from captivity 1 to release 3.
Okay, so there's a reasonable explanation of the 400 and 430. Besides that, what could it possibly be in this case? Do we talk in sometimes in round numbers? And we do, right? I said, if I went to school for 15 years, I was a decade in school. Yeah, actually maybe a little bit longer. But sometimes we round, and rounding doesn't necessarily make it wrong. So it could be a rounding thing where we said it's going to be 400 years. You're going to be in captivity. It could have to do with the different takings away, the different releasings. So those are all possibilities, right? So not a contradiction. I just want to make sure that makes sense. And what else has Abraham promised in this? Verse 15.
You'll live a long life.
Have a good long life. Again, he's being told about some hardship that his seed is going to face. But you're going to have a good long life. It's not going to be in your time. And so that's a blessing, right? I mean, Abraham was blessed. That was one of his blessings. 16 is a unique verse to me. It talks about when his people are going to be released in the 4th generation. And then he says this, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. What does that mean? What do you think that means?
They're still going to come to the better than the situation before.
You know what I'm saying? I don't know.
More.
The Amorites here are kind of staying as a nation, maybe as a whole for the Canaanite people. He says, it's basically kind of like God's like, I'm watching these people, and they're on a very, very bad track. But there comes a point where God's patience is through, where his long suffering is done. He's going to bring about punishment. The Amorites haven't gotten there yet, but he's saying it's coming. Why do you think he inserts that here? Because what's going to be part of the Amorites or the Canaanites' punishment? Yeah, because he's talking about, this all ties in, why would he say that now? Because he's talking about Abraham, about how he's going to be blessed, both a blessing to the world in both a physical sense and in a spiritual sense. Abraham's, one of the big promises he was given was the land promise, right? Of where he was going to reside. Well, who lives there now? At the time of this writing? Yeah, the Amorites and all those other people. They're a wicked people. So I guess the point is God didn't just cast the people out to make room for Israel to no fault of their own. They were a wicked people that were getting worse and worse. And God says, the iniquity is not yet full, but when the time comes, those people will be cast out for their sins. And you will be given a land, remember all that you didn't work for, fields you didn't plow, houses you didn't build, vineyards you didn't plant. And then he cautions the people. He says, but when you take all that you didn't work for, don't become like them. Because you didn't work for it. Sometimes, when you don't work for something, people don't appreciate it. He cautioned them. He goes, be careful. He goes, just because you're given all that stuff, don't slip into the sins they slipped into, because if they did, what were the consequences? Same ones for the Amorites. You will be displaced. I will not allow my people to live wickedly in things that I've given them. Cody, hold on, Jacob, I'll come to you.
I was going to say this right quick about God's wrath becoming full against the Amorites. Sometimes whenever you discuss with people, they treat it as God's going to punish sin whenever it's at a serious degree and not a so serious degree. They might use an example like this and say, well, God was sparing them because their sin wasn't complete. I think a good comparison would be like, and I'm not a parent, as you know.
Yes. Better than a adult, so yes.
Imagine like if you're a parent and you got a kid, they're acting out in public, you're going to punish them whenever they get home, right? But if your kid does something to the nth degree, you might punish them in public.
Yeah.
And so, that's kind of thing. The Amorites are going to get it in eternity, but if they continue in present to the nth degree, then God says He's going to punish them. He knows they are going to.
Yeah. I mean, it's always the same. Even when you're raising kids, even as you try to give your kids, as they get older, leeway, because they're going to leave eventually, right? So you're trying to get them self-sufficient as much as possible. So sometimes even when you're seeing them do something stupid or dumb, sometimes you just let it go. You're just like, all right, maybe life will teach them on its own. You don't do this, life's going to catch up to you and teach you without me having to step in. At other times, if it gets out of hand, you step in, even later in life, and say, you cannot do that. That is not acceptable. So yeah, again, the parent-child relationship is used by God over and over again. That's why the qualification for an elder is to have children, to have believing children, because if you don't understand that relationship or handle that relationship well, how are you going to try to handle a familial relationship in a church family? How are you going to do that? You've got to be successful in one to hopefully be successful in the other. You got something, Jacob?
I have a footnote here, Exodus 12, verse 41, and it says, and it came to pass at the end of 430 years, on that same day, it came to pass that all the armies of the Lord went out of the land of Egypt.
Yep. That's the comparison there between the 400 years and the 430. I think either like Cody is saying, maybe some different time frames in there, probably more realistically surrounding, saying you're going to be 400 years in captivity. In actuality, the Bible quotes as 430.
Yeah, and them going in iterations like that, like what Cody was saying, is they weren't in for 430. All of them were in for 400. Now, when your stint was your stint, but overall, you have 430. They individually were 400. You could say.
Yep. And again, I don't think it's so much of an issue for us, but some people might, trying to disparage the Bible, might bring that up to you to say, hey, look at this discrepancy. So it's good to be aware of it so you can have an answer for it. Does 400 and 430, does that have anything to do with what the Bible says, how we're supposed to live or how we're supposed to be? No, but to a person trying to get out from under the rule of the Bible or the authority of the Bible, they want to point out things like this so they can live however they want. So it's good to have an answer. Anything else on that?
I think it's interesting, he specifically calls out the Amorites here, and that's the people that's more or allies were. Their Amorites were the ones that went with it, rescued Lot.
That's right, I didn't think about that, yeah.
So I'm curious if his influence is keeping them around as a tribe longer than what they would have been otherwise.
Yeah, probably so. There's other examples in the Bible where a good person, again, my names get confused, but where a good person is living amongst wicked people, and even the wicked people recognize they're being blessed for that good person. They want to keep him around. They want to keep him in their midst because they realize good things are happening because of this person. Even though they don't want to do what he does, they want to live the way he lives, they like having him around. And you can even see that with people in the world, people who are worldly. Sometimes they like having, Christian friends, you want to say. It's a sense of normalcy. You go to their house, not everybody's drunk, pass out on the house. I mean, there's a family unit. People are drawn to that. I mean, why do you think gangs and everything is so popular? Because the family unit, that normalcy has been displaced. And people are looking to replace it with something. And so they, unfortunately, go about it the wrong way. Final thing there in the reading, it says in verse 14, and afterward they shall come out with great substance. Do you remember what happened when the Israelites left Egypt?
Word from Egypt.
Uh-huh.
They took items from
The people of Egypt, they basically sacked Egypt on their way out by the people giving them stuff. The Egyptians were the Egyptian people wanted them gone so bad, they're like, here, by all means, take what you want and go. And so they came out of Egypt a very wealthy nation. Again, not because of their own, but because of the hand of God. All that being foretold before it all happened. 17 to the end of the chapter.
And it came to pass that when the sun went down and it was dark, behold, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp that passed between those pieces. And the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, Unto thy seed have I given this land from the river Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates. The Canaanites, and the Kenizzites, and the Kadmonites, and the Hittites, and the Perizzites, and the Rethims, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Girgashites, and the Jebusites.
So again, now it explains. This to me is a little bit strange. Abraham asked for a sign. He is told to prepare a sacrifice. He does it. He sees this vision. In the Bible, at least, I don't see how what the vision. I don't see how it's an answer to his request for a sign. Who, again, names. Who was the guy that asked for the fleece to be wet and the ground to be dry? It's like, wasn't Gideon? Was that Gideon? It was Gideon. That was his sign, so that's an obvious thing that he asked. Have some patience with me, have the fleece to be dry and the ground to be wet. He asked for it to happen the opposite way the next night. He wanted a sign. Abraham asked for a sign. Doesn't specify the sign, but it doesn't tell us what the sign was, other than the fact that he, I guess, saw this vision, and the fact that the vision was troubling, and the fact that he was foretold the future. Maybe that was just enough. Maybe the fact that he got to communicate with God in a certain way and got to hear some one-on-one, that satisfied him. But it doesn't really, it's not like Gideon, it doesn't say, I asked for this and that actually happened. Okay, I'm good to go. Let's go. Just seems a little bit strange, or a little bit, not strange, just different. In verse 18, what do we have there?
give the boundaries of the land that they're going to inherit.
The land promise, right? If you could sum it up. And where is the land promise given to Abraham? Huh? No, not physically. I'm sorry, the geographic boundaries. Where's it at?
Egypt to Euphrates, all the way to Euphrates River.
Yeah. When was that accomplished?
1 Kings chapter 8.
1 Kings chapter 8. It actually happens a couple of times. It happened under Solomon. He pulls it off in his reign. And then they start losing stuff. And actually Jeroboam II in 2 Kings 14:25, he reestablishes it briefly again. So the land promise was given. Now, some people again disparage the Bible because they say, hey, it's not there now, so God's a liar. What was God's promise? Was God's promise conditional or non-conditional? It's conditional.
You do this, I'll do this.
As long as you're faithful, you get to have it. As soon as you're unfaithful, it'll be taken away. Just like it says the iniquity of the Amorites was not yet full, you could actually say it this way. The iniquity of the Israelites was not full, but when it was, God took it away. That's all I have for chapter
Is this
15.
part of the problem it's still fighting over today?
Oh, it's still the exact same problem they're fighting
Some
over.
say God gave it to me, and they say, no, God gave it to us. And
Yeah.
then back and forth, back
Back
and
and
forth.
forth.
And
But
it-
the
That
audacity,
land will never be settled.
no.
Never be settled.
The audacity of the U.S. or any other government to think they can go in there and in our brief history of 200 plus years and try to fix what has been going on over there for thousands ain't gonna happen. My opinion. It ain't gonna happen. It ain't gonna happen. They're not gonna get along. Just not gonna get along. Unfortunately, they're both wrong now. So, just
When we talk to the river Euphrates here, we see back in early Genesis where the Garden of Eden was. Is this part of that land there that's so fertile with the Garden of Eden that this is part of that fertile land that's promised to them?
possible. I mean, that it seems like mankind did start in that area, and there are a lot of things, geography that changes, before the flood to after the flood, but there's a few benchmarks that are consistent. The Euphrates River, whether it runs in the exact same course that it does, is consistently named throughout biblical history in that general area. So to say generally, yeah, probably generally, exactly, who knows? Yeah. Flood wiped all that out. Anything else? Well, that's all I got for chapter 15. We'll do 16 next week. Thank y'all.
So basically, this, he got in that deep sleep, God was showing him down the road.
He was showing in the future.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
He was showing about his people. Right now, he doesn't have a son, so he's
Right.
showing him his people going into being big enough to go into captivity to Egypt, growing even larger. Then finally, after 400 years, being released and coming back into the land where he's at now as their inheritance. Telling him everything that's going to happen, and then trying to, I guess, comfort him because it said it was a horror that he saw. It says, again, it's not happening to you. You're going to live to a ripe old age, but this is what's going to happen. And I guess there is some comfort in knowing the future. I mean, if someone told you, let's say,
You're just like me or other people, they read it, I don't see that till y'all say that, I know,
right?
so it's like down the road.
It's down the road.
Yeah.
It's down the road. Everybody lives their life. You plan your stuff and do the best you can for your kids. You're trying to make some type of an allowance to help them, right? So if you had somebody in authority, like God, said, this is what's going to happen, it's going to be okay, and this is how it's going to be fulfilled, there would be some comfort to that. Yeah, it's going to be a rough road, but it's going to work out all right, as long as they hold to the promise, as long as they hold to God. So I guess that's what he was trying to get across to Abraham. It seems like it appeased him because he didn't follow it up with any other questions like, no, I want to see a sign. It's like, that's good enough. That's enough. That'll satisfy me for now. Thank y'all.